This week, Insta360 released an important update for the Ace Pro, which contains at least 4 important improvements. So today I'd like to briefly show you what it's all about and why the changes to the firmware are so interesting. One of the particular strengths of the Ace Pro is its good dynamic range, which means that the camera is very good at capturing details in the very bright and very dark areas of the image at the same time. And in comparison to most other camera manufacturers, Insta360 has opted for a rather unusual approach in the case of the Ace Pro in this regard. There was previously no dedicated HDR recording mode. Instead, HDR was automatically activated in normal video mode when shooting at up to 30 frames per second. This HDR feature could not be deactivated. In HDR mode, shots with different exposures are usually overlaid on top of each other to enable a dynamic range that far exceeds the dynamic range of the sensor. Insta360's approach is unusual because in the case of video recordings, HDR often comes with disadvantages. For example, in the form of more image noise, flickering, poorer stabilization, or simply an unnatural look. I have to admit that in the case of the Ace Pro, none of these problems are actually visible or noticeable. HDR has been implemented perfectly. Looks rich in contrast and usually very natural. Only when the sun shines in your face does your skin sometimes take on a somewhat unnatural color. Nevertheless, I can understand that many users would at least like to have the option of deactivating the HDR mode if required. And this is now possible. When you open the recording settings, you will now see the active HDR feature at the top right. Here you can now activate or deactivate HDR. But that's not the only new feature related to HDR. One of my favorite features of the Ace Pro is the free frame mode. Here, the unstabilized images from the sensor are saved and you can freely select the field of view in the app. This can be very useful. Previously, shots were taken in free frame mode without HDR. With the new firmware, the HDR feature has also been added to the free frame mode. Active HDR can also be switched on and off in free frame mode via the same menu, and the same also applies to loop recording. And the new firmware contains another very useful change. If you want to achieve the best results with your Ace Pro, you should adjust a few of the settings. For example, it is very important that you reduce the sharpness. Shots with a high level of sharpness look unnatural and digital. Unfortunately, until now, you could only adjust the sharpness in the main menu, and the setting from the main menu then applied to all shooting modes. However, it may be that you want to shoot in a certain mode, for example in photo mode with high sharpness, and in standard video mode only with low or medium sharpness. Or perhaps you want to create a preset with low sharpness. None of this was possible before. The new firmware, however, now allows you to adjust the sharpness individually depending on the mode. To do this, open the advanced recording settings by swiping from the right edge to the left. And you can adjust the sharpness at the bottom here via the symbol with the triangle. As I said, I would advise against using high. If you don't want to edit your shots, I recommend medium. Apart from that, the Ace Pro now supports other accessories. For example, the Action GPS remote from Insta360. As you may know, there is a dedicated remote for the Ace Pro with a fully functional display. But the support for the Action remote is of course useful if you already own it. It is also cheaper than the GPS preview remote and also captures the GPS data. A link to both remotes can be found in the video description. The Vimoto V9S headset is now also supported and allows you to capture audio or control the camera with voice commands. There are of course a few other minor changes and improvements. For example, you can now zoom in and out in webcam mode. If you want to learn more about how the Ace Pro works, check out my full tutorial. There will be more videos on the Ace Pro, so stay tuned and see you next time.